Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining this IPR webinar on an IPR page award-winning case study featuring the first place winners of the IPR page case study competition. They're going to present their case, Gone with the Wind, Tractor Supply Co.'s Rapid Response to DEI Backlash. Our presenters today are Marielle Cook, Rachel Schuler, and Ada Shippen, all from Brigham Young University, with their faculty advisor, Dr. Christopher Wilson. And then moderating today's conversation is Geoff Curtis, founder of Marshall Curtis Communications. So thank you all for being here. Before we begin, a few reminders that this is being recorded. It'll be available by end of day tomorrow to watch on our website or YouTube channel. I'll email it to all registrants as well. If you have any questions, you can message me privately, and then we are going to have time for audience Q&A toward the end, but feel free to use the chat and Q&A features throughout the presentation if you have any questions, resources you want to share, or comments. But with that, I'll hand it over to Rachel.
Okay, can you hear me now? I'm so sorry, it cut me off. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Hello, and thank you for being here today. We're honored to present our case study, Gone with the Wind, Tractor Supply Co.'s Rapid Response to DEI Backlash. The transformative era of 2020 sparked a reckoning across industries, social justice movements, a global pandemic, a rising demand for corporate accountability. In response, many companies ramped up their DEI initiative. Tractor Supply Co. was one of them. But seemingly out of the blue, TSC reversed course. A single statement triggered a domino effect, influencing public opinion, media discourse, and corporate strategy far beyond its own brand. This fostered in a new era of a crossroads, begging the question, when speaking out on social issues, what should companies prioritize, and what are the risks of missteps? So let's start at the beginning. Tractor Supply Co. was founded in 1938 and grew steadily through the post-war decades and reached $5 billion in sales by 2013. Today, it stands as the largest rural lifestyle retailer in the United States. The company's leadership team and Hal Lawton has been central in shaping its identity in recent years. What started as a farm supply company has evolved into a lifestyle brand with a broader social footprint. So let's look into this snapshot of this transition. The original slogan was "the stuff you need," focusing on products. We see a transition into "for life out here," a nod towards values. But by 2014, life out here became not just a tagline, but a strategic platform, a way of framing rural identity as a lifestyle worth investing in. This brought them much external recognition. CEO Hal Lawton in 2020 made it clear that success depended on customer experience. At the same time, Forbes described the brand as selling something deeper than just products. It was selling a dream. That dream of independence, simplicity, and rural pride became the emotional core of the TSC brand. But success starts at home. So in their internal affairs, Tractor Supply Co. didn't wait for a movement to begin its DEI work. By 2019, it had already rolled out inclusive workforce policies, a bit ahead of the curve, we would add. Between 2020 and 2023, they published ESG reports, funded minority-focused education, supported vaccine pay, etc. By 2021, TSC formalized its ambitions with measurable 5-year DEI goals. These included doubling store diversity, increasing managers of color by 50%, spending 50% more on diverse suppliers, and investing 30% more in its education for Black communities. These weren't just numbers, they were meant to reinforce Tractor Supply's belief in rural inclusivity.
On June 6, 2024, conservative influencer Robbie Starbuck posted a viral video on YouTube and X titled, "Exposed, Tractor Supply Went Woke." He criticized the company's support for Pride events, voter registration, and DEI training, claiming it betrayed rural values. The video reached 2.9 million views, generating thousands of reposts and comments. Calls for boycotts poured in from conservative consumers. Tractor Supply's X account was privatized, CEO Hal Lawton blocked Starbuck, and then the company went silent on all of their social media accounts. Comments like, "The most powerful vote you have is the dollar bill. Buy the world you want, not another dollar from me." And "I'm shocked and very disappointed. Won't be shopping there either. Go woke, go broke" is a common theme the CEO doesn't get. See ya, TSC. 10 days after the video was released on YouTube and Twitter, Tractor Supply stock dropped by a $2 billion market cap in just 1 week. The pressure was fast and it was loud.
Exactly 21 days later, on June 27th, almost a year ago to the day, Tractor Supply broke their silence. They posted a 5 bullet point statement on X that completely rolled back their DEI commitments. It linked to a news release quietly published on their website the same day. The release opened with a familiar metaphor, one meant to feel warm, safe, and trustworthy, with the quoting, "Every day, our 50,000 team members take care of our customers like family. We deeply value our relationship with our customers and the communities we call home." But that reassurance was followed by 5 decisive changes. No longer submitting data to the Human Rights Campaign, refocusing team member engagement groups on mentorship and business support, eliminating all DEI roles and retiring current DEI goals, though they emphasized maintaining a respectful workplace, withdrawing carbon emission goals in favor of focusing on land and water conservation, prioritizing animal welfare and veteran causes while ending support for pride festivals, and then nothing. No press conference, no interviews, no explanation. Just one post, one vague, hard to find news release, and silence. Still, that one post made waves. Conservative customers cheered. Robbie Starbucks followers celebrated the massive victory for sanity. And in a Barron survey of 251 frequent shoppers, 78% said they supported the changes. But under Tractor Supply's own post, a different reaction began to unfold. Many customers, especially LGBTQ+ and BIPOC individuals, felt blindsided. On Pride in Agriculture, one member said, "Rural America thrives on diversity. Every person contributes." And queer farmer Maggie Cheney said, "It's a horrible feeling to feel like you're getting erased." This wasn't just brand criticism, it was heartbreak from people who had once felt seen by the brand and then suddenly didn't. Inside the company, these effects continued. Employees began to resign. One of them, Joe Montello, a store manager and LGBTQIA+ community member, explained, "I felt that they betrayed not only their employees, but also a large part of their customers." Outside of the organization, longtime partners and shareholders responded with outrage. The National Black Farmers Association, GLAAD, the Human Rights Campaign, they all condemned the reversal. GLAAD CEO Sarah K. Ellis called it an embarrassing capitulation to anti-LGBTQ extremists. And on GLAAD's website, a member demanded, "You want us to believe you care about rural American priorities? Then care about them. All of them. Care about queer farmers, black farmers, women farmers, all farmers." The MBFA went even further, calling for a national boycott and demanding the resignation of CEO Hal Lawton in response to the rollback. And while we were researching the communications response, something stood out. Tractor Supply's executive management team did not include their PR director, Tricia Whitmore. And within 6 months of the reversal, that position was posted online. So we asked ourselves, was PR even at the table when these decisions were made? Did Tricia Whitmore disagree with the direction? Was she sidelined? Or did she step away on her own? We wish we could have had more access to the conversations that took place behind those closed doors, especially to understand how their response was shaped and who was involved in shaping it.
From a financial perspective, the results were surprisingly stable. In Q4 2024 reports, Tractor Supply reported opening 80 new stores, which is quite impressive with the shift toward online shopping and modern-day retail difficulties. They also reported increased digital sales to over $1 billion and reported modest year-over-year gains. Hal Lawton was quoted saying about these Q4 2024 reports, quote, "The fundamentals of our business remain strong with ongoing market share gains, record Neighbors Club members, digital sales in excess of $1 billion, and high return new store openings. I extend my sincere gratitude to the more than 50,000 team members for their steadfast dedication to upholding our mission and values and supporting their communities," end quote. Reputationally, the company took a hit, but not a collapse. Popularity dropped by about 5.5 points according to YouGov, and then leveled off. This type of drop is considered pretty marginal when compared to other ebbs in popularity tracked by YouGov.
And so, as many of you know, if not all of you, Tractor Supply was the first, but certainly not the last. Since June, companies like John Deere, Meta, McDonald's, and Target have followed with their own DEI reversals. And this has signaled a growing trend. Companies retreating from inclusion policies as they anticipate a more conservative future. But even in this climate, communicators have a responsibility to guide, not just follow. So what happens after this so-called harvest? We believe there were a few key lessons that can be learned during this case study. Number one, that silence leaves a vacuum. When companies stay quiet, others shape the story and the precedent. TSC's rollback became a model for other post-2020 DEI reversals. What you don't say is just as powerful as what you do say. Number two, reputation does not equal revenue. TSC financially recovered, but its long-term reputational impact remains uncertain and is definitely harder to measure. Three, authenticity beats appeasement. Strategic shifts must align with business goals and values. Backlash can fade, but trust is much harder to rebuild. And fourth, PR must lead, not clean up. Communicators should shape strategy from the start, not just respond after the fact, especially on high-stakes social issues.
So what? Tractor Supply's decision wasn't just about policy, it was about values. Yes, the company avoided financial collapse, but it lost something deeper, the trust of many of its employees, consumers, and partners. They abandoned a years-long commitment to DEI in just 3 weeks without clear explanation, inclusive dialogue, or long-term strategy. They traded principles for a quick resolution, and in doing so, they risked looking directionless instead of decisive. The ultimate question, is rolling back DEI the issue, or is it the manner in which it is done?
Okay, so that leads us to evaluating what happened. Here we can see a complete list of the page principles. But let's take a deeper dive into which principles specifically apply to Tractor Supply Co. situation. So, to close, we evaluated Tractor Supply Co.'s response using the page principles, what they did well and where they fell short. Looking here, we chose 4 to focus in on a little bit more. The first being tell the truth. Tractor Supply Co. didn't lie, but they weren't completely transparent either. Comments were blocked, platforms went quiet, and messaging lacked clarity. Truth requires more than selective disclosure. Number 2 is that character is expressed by its people. We heard from executives, we got the news release, but we didn't hear from the 50,000 plus employees who represent the brand every day. Their silence left the company's identity incomplete. Number 3, prove it with action. Tractor Supply Co. acted fast, eliminating roles, shifting priorities, and pivoting strategy. But mid-plan reversals look reactive, not responsive, and that was something that we really focused on, is the difference between reaction versus response. And finally, manage for tomorrow. Tractor Supply Co. responded to their core audience, but they did miss a chance to unify others. This helped us realize that long-term trust takes broader communication. In the end, the page principles wouldn't have changed the outcome, but they could have changed the impact if Tractor Supply Co. had focused in a little bit more on them.
And so with that, they walked away from DEI. Thank you, and we will turn the time over to the question part.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Ada, Marielle, Rachel. Good job. I get to ask you some questions now, and we'll focus this part and these questions, just kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and give people a view into how the process went to put this all together, but the things that you looked at, the research you collected, and your process for putting this case study together. So maybe let's start with kind of the big question that we had at the beginning of this process when you guys decided that you wanted to do this, which was, which case were you going to do? So maybe could you talk for a few minutes about what the process looked like for you to come to the point where you identified a case that you wanted to analyze. What did you go through? What did you look at? Um, yeah, go talk about that for a second.
Okay, I can start us off, I guess. So to start off, we knew that the case was the most important part. If you didn't have the right case, then it was kind of game over. And so to start off, we had some criteria that we had to go into our research, and we actually started our research of PR cases last summer, which is interesting because last summer was when all of this was going on. But we started our initial research last summer, and we were focusing on the page principles, how many of these actually implemented or have things that they were missing the page principles, as well as the timeliness of the issue. Um, does it have a social issue involved or something that's kind of a hot topic? As well as, is there enough sufficient information that is available for us to even know and evaluate? Um, as well as, is just the purpose, does it have anything to do with today? Does it have does it have effects to other corporations or other organizations? And so once we did some initial research, we went into creating little PowerPoints in like September, and Ray, Marielle, and I would find a company or an idea that we had that we wanted to use, and then we would present it to the group, and then we would do it again. So we had a week to think about each other's presentations, and then we had another set the next week. And then after that, we had the best idea of the top 6 presentations, 6 topics, and we went and decided Tractor Supply Co. from there, due to DEI being a hot topic even back then. Little did we know how much more it would be after we chose it as a topic, but also with Tractor Supply Co., there was this element of adaptation versus conformity, and the history of Target last year and Disney, and just this feeling that there was more to it than what was initially portrayed. I don't know, Marielle or Ray, if you have anything to add on that.
No, I really liked how you talked about the adaptation versus conformity. That's a principle that we really talked about, and we wanted our research and the case that we chose to really show the different, like maybe not the difference because this isn't a comparison. We aren't comparing to a different company, but really talk about maybe the issues behind adapting to your environment versus just conforming. So.
Do you want to maybe just talk about a few of the other cases that you looked at that you didn't pick?
Yeah, it's really fascinating, right? We know that this last year, 2024, was an upcoming election year, which meant that a lot of policies and or rhetoric within the status quo were subject to change. One of the examples was that we were studying some of the conflicts on, for example, Columbia, the school, University of Columbia in New York, and handling, like, say, the Palestinian and Jewish conflicts associated in the Middle East. Those are really fascinating. As we were looking, there was many presidents who've resigned during this year throughout the United States while dealing with this conflict. And they had some intermediate presidents who were trying to manage this issue. And how do we help the students, but how do we hold our beliefs as an institution? And one of the interesting things that we were studying or looking for as well during this whole search is companies who stayed their ground and had people pursue them, or switch their rhetoric and become the pursuer after their consumer base. And that had a really interesting impact on the companies that we looked at and who we chose to research.
We also looked into Target as well, but we felt, especially because Tractor Supply was the first, verging off, but going into the DEI topic, Tractor Supply was really the first to walk away, and it was like the first of a wave, like that initial. And so we really wanted to understand why and take a deeper dive into that case as well.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about once you made the decision to go with Tractor Supply. Let's talk a little bit about what you did to do the research for that. Maybe if you wouldn't mind talking about where you started, like where did you initially go to look for information about this case, and then what did you find, and then how did that kind of influence how you did the rest of the research for this project?
I think Ray should take that first part because she deserves all the credit for the first part of our research. So take it away.
Thank you. Given just the scope and magnitude of all of the people or companies following suit, we really wanted to gain an understanding of if this was another trend or if they were actually answering the call of their consumer base. Like, what did this actually look like? So I had the opportunity to go around to lots of different tractor supply chains here in Utah and go and just speak with the consumer base as well as some of the employees. And funnily enough, I did run into a couple of different CEOs at these companies who have nothing to do with Tractor Supply Co., who all echoed the sentiments of Tractor Supply Co., that they were happy to be pulling back on DEI. And that was really surprising for me as a student who believes in diversity and inclusion policies, like just being kind to everybody, that, you know, all of these people were like, oh, this is something that we want to pull back on. So we wanted to know why. What was the motivation? What did this look like, and what were the beliefs of both the consumers and the employees? And surprisingly, because this was an informal primary research operation, I guess, all of these people stood in favor of pulling back from DEI. There was not a single person that we talked to that wasn't happy with this change.
And like all of them knew about it too, which was I think we were both kind of, I think when Ray came back to Ada and I, she goes, so I went to these stores, I talked to like over 50 people, and she said everybody knew about it, which is not surprising in a lot of ways, but also surprising in some ways. So that actually helped inform our, oh, more people know about this than we had maybe initially assumed would have. So that was interesting too. And then kind of after that, our research kind of changed a little once we had more information about what consumers and employees and stuff knew. We really looked into the financial reports. So I was in charge of looking at financial reports, and I had Q3 by the time we were really deep diving into their documentation and their website and all of that information. And I just like kept checking until January when their Q4 report came out. And then when that came out, I was anticipating something different than what I saw. So that was really interesting to have that as well, which we shared that research earlier. In addition to a very late night in the library where we were writing up our report, we were supposed to be finishing it in the next it was due in a couple of days, and we had felt really good about where we were. And Ada and I just ended up on this deep dive on LinkedIn, stalking all of the C-suite people, finding out that the position of the PR person was open. So it was interesting. Research just kind of popped up as we were going. Sometimes we just have a random question pop into our heads, like, what about this thing? And there were all sorts of resources online if we looked really deep. So
That's great. And if I remember right, I think there was a moment when you were doing the research when you made some connections between what you found out about Robbie Starbuck and his involvement in this whole thing that kind of pushed you in a different direction. Would you talk about that?
Ada looks excited.
Yeah, well, it's just so interesting. All of it was just so interesting because it never got boring because just as Marielle just said, like even until the very end, there was new information and there was just like figuring out at the end that Tractor Supply Co. was really kind of nonchalant about releasing their news release, but that's another topic. As far as Robbie Starbuck goes, it was really interesting because just looking at how he really started and had such an impact from the very beginning on so many major corporations as this failed Hollywood producer slash couldn't get elected in the Tennessee government, but has a podcast on politics and somehow has a large following and suddenly makes this impact on Tractor Supply Co., one of the largest, if not the largest, agricultural brand in the US. And so it's interesting how when we looked up more about him and his impact and what he said and how he really specifically targeted Hal Lawton in his initial tweet and YouTube video as well. And just calling for the consumers to make calls to Tractor Supply Co. It seemed a lot more aggressive, but when you actually look at what he was calling them, he was trying to give people ways to do it respectfully, to call the corporation and say, hey, we don't want DEI. And that's where there's some blanks that we would love to still have filled. We wanted the access to the call records. That would have been really helpful for us in our research to see clearly Tractor Supply Co. responded within 3 weeks of that first tweet and video. So the big question mark is how many people responded and called to Tractor Supply Co. to make it that urgent of an issue for them. Because surely it wasn't just Robbie Starbuck and people retweeting, right? It had to have been the action of the calls and the emails and those things that we can only assume would have led to that type of response and reaction from Tractor Supply Co.
Especially since it was so immediate, as we had demonstrated in our presentation. They had long-term DEI goals and other initiatives that were perhaps more left-leaning, and immediately all of these things are being revoked within 3 weeks. Like we said earlier, no press release, very little communication with our public at large. One of the things is when we were doing this research and we're talking to the employees, I'm like, so what did you get? Like on your end, as you have these customers who come in and are like, what's up with this? How do you respond? And they're like, we've been given nothing. We've been told that we're not supposed to speak on this information, and to try and change the subject with the customers. So it's just really fascinating, right? Because there are a few gaps here in this research that we just didn't have access for information to.
Yeah, good. Okay, so in the case study part, you had to keep it objective, right? But then there's a part of this competition where you are trying to make sense and analyze what's going on and make some judgment calls. So maybe just talk for a minute about what your process was for looking at the facts, but then trying to make sense of those facts given the page principles and kind of the IPR mission and research.
I think that it was, oh, something fell, sorry. It was really useful in the end while we were analyzing, taking the page principles individually and looking at how they applied to the case. We sat in a room at the library at BYU together and we just like dove into it, long brainstorm session, just talking, trying to understand. And what's so amazing within communications, but specifically as PR professionals, is that we have these ethical standards and these principles that we try to live by. And so it was really interesting to take these principles and then apply them and see how either they were or weren't applied. So, for example, proving with action, we felt they weren't proving their corporate character with action because it felt so hushed up, so quiet, like a quick change to appease a group of consumers who were angry without really communicating to maybe the people who felt like they were being left behind, which felt like also they weren't telling the truth or being honest with where the company was or what their real values were or what mattered to them. And so the more we wanted to take the approach with this case where we understood where Tractor Supply Co. is coming from, given their consumer base is, they're out of Tennessee, very south, maybe a lot more white consumers potentially who have a more political viewpoint leaning more conservative or Republican or whatever you want to call it. And so in that way, maybe their change made sense. And so we didn't necessarily want to take the stance that like their change was wrong because we don't know enough about the company or all the little details. We're not like sitting in the boardroom knowing exactly. And it felt kind of uncomfortable to tell them that like, you're all wrong, you didn't do anything right. But it made a lot more sense to say you went about it really wrong, maybe even from the beginning. And so that was kind of how we approached our analysis of it, was applying those page principles, not from the perspective of saying that Tractor Supply Co. is this awful company, but rather like what were they trying to accomplish but failed at. So I think I answered your question. If I didn't, I apologize.
No, that was really good. Good job, Marielle. Well, there's only one more minute before we're going to turn it over, but good job. Congratulations on your work on this and great presentation. So I'll turn it over now to Geoff, and he's going to have some more questions for you.
Thank you, Chris. And before I get into the really hard-hitting questions, I want to say congratulations and a job very well done. I've been judging these cases for about 5 years, maybe a little bit longer. And this was the best researched case and presented case I've seen. So it was a pleasure to hear you present it for the second time. So again, great job and congratulations. We've been bouncing around some of these topics already, but I want to dive in a little bit deeper to some specifics. And I'll start with the employee piece of it and putting yourself in the employee's shoes. And since you don't know too much, I mean, you know what you kind of heard when interviewing some employees. If you were leading internal and employee communications first, what would you recommend the company should have done if you're leading that function? And if you're an employee, how would you have liked to have been communicated to?
That's a lovely question. You know, my side quest thing I was doing while going to university is working at Walmart at night from like 8 p.m. to, 8 a.m. And communications for employees in retail in general seems to be pretty poor. And so in regards to that, with this company, I think employees just want to feel honored and respected. And that happens when they feel like they're having direct communication. So whether it's an email or a specific newsletter, or maybe it's the manager of the store coming in and saying, hey, we've encountered this specific difficulty. Here's a little bit of like the background. We would just like to encourage you to address it by like this, and that. And if you have any questions, feel free to come to me. We're here to support you. Any changes that have been made in the company are a direct reflection of how important you guys are to us. The employees matter. Just verifying adding that sense of validity that we're not throwing our employees out into the fire. Like, go deal with this dumpster fire that we're supposed to be managing, but we're going to put you out on the front lines for it to manage it for us because we don't have the guts to like manage said issue. Not to say that TSC necessarily did that, but I have certainly seen that as that side quester, that night side quester that I was. And so just helping people engage with conflict by giving them tools should be the priority of most companies.
And oh, sorry,
Go for it.
I'll make it really fast. I do think also it's interesting that within our research, if I remember this case wrong, I apologize. But I do remember while we were studying other PR cases from the past, like the Disney one, or it was United Airlines, I think was another one. It's actually interesting. There will be whistleblowers within a company after a big PR thing like this, where they say like, look at this letter we got from corporate, or this is the meeting we held at corporate after this happened. And there wasn't any information about that, which almost makes you wonder, like, did they communicate with their employees at all? Was there any, like, beyond that one letter that we showed you at the beginning, was there any other discussion trying to hear from the employees? It doesn't seem, besides that letter, like there was. And that's kind of interesting. Ada might have more to say about that.
Oh, yeah, that's really along the lines of what I was gonna say, but it just there was clearly a bit of blindsidedness that happened for the employees, and we could see that based off of the access that we had to quotes that people talked about on even more private, or not necessarily private, but like more niche websites that we found that were chats that people were just so disappointed, right? And felt like they weren't seen by their own company that they've worked at for like 15 years. And so clearly, and we can also see with the rapid response, right? 3 weeks, there's probably not a lot of time in their decision to just send out an initial release and then another one, but it would have been better if they had taken a little bit of extra time to inform their employees, like Ray and then also Marielle were saying, so that the employees, especially those that pertain to the LGBTQ plus community or the BIPOC community, those that were more strongly affected because of their own personal beliefs, that they didn't feel like their company that they've been loyal to for so long just kind of said, sorry, we don't care about you anymore. We don't, you're not important. And so I think going back to your main question, Geoff, of just informing the employees and really helping them feel like they matter, and then helping them know how to cover questions and proceed forward, knowing that Tractor Supply Co. still cares about them, as well as the consumers that may feel a little bit blindsided as well.
Yeah, so let's follow that string a little bit because I think you bring up an important point about employee communications. And Mariel, I think you talked about just external influence as it relates to Robbie Starbuck and other activists. So my question is this, is specific to customer segment and potential employee group alienation, do you think there's a middle ground or a compromise versus an extreme pivot when companies' values are challenged, both from external activists?
Yeah, we actually talked about this a lot, and we've wondered if um, Tractor Supply Co. took the wrong move from the beginning. Before this all happened, when they first put in DEI practices and some other things. Not that the DEI practice was the problem, but maybe the way that it was communicated. So, for example, if you watch Robbie Starbuck's video or look at some of the pictures that he posted on Twitter and on YouTube, a lot of them are about pride celebrations. So, all over their corporate building, they would have pride flags and their website would change. And so they were really diving in and investing in not just practices as far as maybe hiring or teaching inclusivity, but maybe in celebrating some of these things that Robbie Starbuck was saying don't align with their consumer base. And so we wondered if maybe the issue wasn't necessarily the practices, but how the practices were communicated. Um, and and then we talked about how, but then to go back after integrating it to that degree, if you go back halfway, like Ada brought up at one point, Target did, then you have anger from both sides, which is you've walked away from me, even if it's halfway on the side of agreeing with DEI or whatever it may be. And then on the side of fighting for it to be taken away, you've only walked halfway. Um, so a slow walk sometimes doesn't result in the best results, but a full, maybe they were hoping that by going complete the other way and responding entirely to Starbuck and those who had been influenced by his post would help to kind of shift the ground and appease them. And that's not the great way of doing it either. So maybe from the get-go is like a slower, this goes back to the whole idea of conformity versus adaptivity. So adapting new practices, adapting new maybe strategies or campaigns in a way that sits with your stakeholders, where you do research, you understand your stakeholders, who they are, what they want from you, and then you decide who your corporate character is and apply those identities that you've found to be important in a way that communicates well to all the stakeholders, not just what you think is the best way to do it, because that's what can lead to such pushback. I think, but
Yeah, I would just like to add, you guys, on the IPRC webinar podcast a few weeks ago in the language of leadership, empathy, and cultural clarity, Johnny Taylor Jr. had talked about the difference between bipartisan legislation and verbiage and nonpartisan legislation and verbiage. And even though these companies aren't necessarily dealing with legislation, they're using verbiage or implementing policies within their sphere that don't have to even be bipartisan or partisan. They can just be nonpartisan in general. So identifying and using unifying language for both parties can be really helpful, but then also establishing like, this is whatever it is we're doing isn't political in any way, scope, or form. This is like what our core value is as a company, and like doing a good job of communicating that with people is really good. Making sure to, once again, it doesn't always have to be partisan or bipartisan. It can be nonpartisan stuff that you're doing as a company as well.
right. Inclusivity as a word and as a practice is not partisan, but maybe sometimes the way you communicate it or instigate it can appear to be.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
So I want to talk a little bit more about influence because you brought up and we've seen the influence that Robbie Starbuck has had related to other companies and just influence that external activists have overall. And since I had the opportunity to read your full case write-up, I just want to read one thing that you put in there, and that was that this societal shift requires communication professionals to understand that the sphere of influence has a much broader range and power in the modern world than it used to. And I think we're looking at this through the influence that external activists have. But if we start looking at it through the influence that Tractor Supply Company has, which they have influence and other companies have influence, how should Tractor Supply Company have used their influence differently in this situation?
I'll have a brief comment of something. Specifically the fact, going back to kind of what we've been talking about with the history of Tractor Supply Co. and their jump into DEI and how they were not just fully in DEI, but publicly awarded for their efforts in being engaged in diversity. They were recognized throughout the nation for their efforts in diversity, which kind of put them in two playing fields a little bit of they were award-winning corporate organization that was awarded, oh wow, they're so diverse. But if you think about it a lot, it's like, well, that's actually really interesting that they're so diverse because it's Tractor Supply Co., this huge agricultural brand. Like we would talk about it, and I was doing the research, and because I was the one who initially actually proposed Tractor Supply Co. for our case. And it was so interesting because I looked up these quotes that were like, oh yeah, this award winning for diversity. And then they went back on it and they had these diversity goals to 2026, which we didn't really explicitly mention in this presentation, but their goals that they rolled back were a 5-year plan that were supposed to end in 2026, not 2024, which made it a lot more of an abrupt shift as well. But it was just interesting because then we thought about it. It's like, wait, this is Tractor Supply Co. Why are they being awarded for like all of these extra efforts? So there was clearly this influence on both sides. And we think that because they had already kind of made that bridge, they had a large consumer base still that were conservative. And maybe some of them, yeah, clearly were not a huge fan of DEI, but they had also made a bridge to all of the increasing minority groups that are engaged with agriculture, like the National Black Farmers Alliance or members of the LGBTQ community, or women are also younger, different groups that we initially think when we think of farmers. And so I think to kind of put it more shortly to answer the question, it goes back to acknowledgement and open communication. I know that seems kind of like a basic answer, but helping all of the consumers feel recognized. And that's obviously, oh, that's like a magical, yeah, you wish, how can you make everyone happy? You can't really make everyone happy, but you can try to make everyone feel seen by the way that you communicate the changes and don't just react. You can't just go back on a 5-year plan in 3 weeks and get rid of everything without the people that you're affecting feeling like they're just not being appreciated or valued by the company. Now, that isn't to say if they had gone back on it in 2026, they wouldn't have felt that way. But I think that we agree that if they had done it with a little bit more time, announced the changes, allowed people to really see it and not just feel like it was being hidden, that maybe they would have felt a little bit more understanding of it, and that could have been a good use of their access to everybody, both on progressive and conservative ways. Yeah, Ray.
When a company has an identity and then they can measure their identity with whatever it is they're doing, they'll go in the right direction. So if you're like, this is our goal, these are our initiatives, these are our objectives, here's a potential issue or crisis that we're managing with. How does this compare to what we believe in? That is how PR will lead. And that's what we'd mentioned in our case as well. Like, PR cannot be cleanup. We're treating PR as cleanup. Crisis comes, like, yeah, okay. What would happen in the world if we decided to lead with good public relations instead of trying to use it to fix any issues or react to any issues that are currently happening?
That may be a question the world will never know.
Well, and
Go ahead, Marielle, sorry.
one thought I've had a lot recently is with my internship that I'm currently doing. I feel like we do a lot of fighting fire rather than preventing fire. And I was thinking about how in this case, they had seen, at least I don't know how they wouldn't have seen, that other companies had been under scrutiny already. They weren't the first business to go under scrutiny for DEI practices. Target had an issue, like Bud Light had an issue. There were all of these PR cases that came before, and Bud Light's particularly lit up like all over the news, all over social media. Everybody knew about it. You'd have to be blind not to have seen it. And so part of me wondered over, I've been thinking over the last few weeks, how hard would it have been to like come together and say, this is our corporate identity as a C-suite. What are we going to do if these types of issues come and get us? Especially with the new election that was coming up. This was an issue that both parties were going to the pulpit and speaking about at like every turn. It was all over the news. And so how effective would it have been for them to already have like a setup idea of who they were, what they were going to do, and then it's not so reactive as we're saying. And I think PR professionals would also enjoy their job a lot more if when C-suite people came to them and said, hey, like just in case, let's build a plan for this, a campaign for this, a strategy for this, rather than it being like, oh, this just happened in the news. What's our statement going to be? How are we going to recover?
It would be interesting, Ada, you brought this up about how their commitment was through 2026. So would it be interesting to see what that messaging exercise would have looked like or what the response would have looked like in 2026? Because would they have said, oh, we've lived up to our commitment. We said we were going, I mean, to me, it creates an interesting conundrum if they get to that point and this happens, but we'll never know. I think we have time for maybe two-ish more questions before we turn it over to the crowd. So one thing, again, in your full case write-up, you noted that, and throughout your presentation too, based from a business standpoint, you noted that the DEI rollback may not have had as large of an impact as might have been expected. So I know this is hindsight, but why do the rollback then?
I think this kind of goes to the idea of earlier, like, well, I don't know. I would have the follow-up question of like, why not do the rollback? I feel like that's what they would end up asking. And because there wasn't as much, as we said, their popularity dropped by like 5.5 points, leveled off, and it's actually just kind of recovered since then. So I don't feel like Tractor Supply Co. has really seen the huge hit that honestly we were expecting. At every turn of our research, we were like, this is going to tell us that it's like killed their company or something like that. And we never got that within our research. And so I think at the end of the day, as I said, as we said in our research, the DEI rollback may not have had as large of an impact as we would have expected. And so maybe the question really does go to what Ray talked about earlier, which is how can we practice these beautiful, wonderful things of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which like from an ethics standpoint just makes a lot of sense. We are a diverse nation. We should be inclusive. Like as a person, I try to understand others, and yeah, I'm not perfect at that, but individuals try to practice that, at least good people try to practice that on a daily basis. And if good individuals are trying to practice that, then corporations should too. So maybe the question is, how do we put these practices in without making maybe people who have an adverse feeling or gut reaction to maybe some of those ideas? How do we make them not feel sidelined might be the right word for that. And so I think the rollback wasn't necessarily the bad decision, but I think the manner in which it was done, and the extent to which it was done, because I don't think everything that they decided to leave behind needed to be left behind in the manner in which it was left behind, if that makes sense. But Ada.
Yeah, I also wanted to comment on that. In that, trying to picture, obviously all of this is in hindsight, but trying to picture them in the moments. And it goes back to what we don't have access to, which is the phone records and the emails. Because I can imagine that if you're Tractor Supply Co. and you're the customer service lines and you're suddenly getting bombarded by phone calls and emails, which we presume is the case, hence the reaction, then you're put in a tough position thinking, are we about to become Bud Light? Like obviously it's the opposite because it's not like they partnered with someone, but still that effect and that negative billions of dollars being lost, there's a lot on the line. And so they didn't necessarily know, but if you're a company that's predominantly assumed to be conservative. Who knows? We again don't have access to either their clientele breakdown either. That would have been interesting to have of what is the ratio of consumers for Tractor Supply Co. How many of them identify to be more conservative versus liberal? We don't know, but thinking that suddenly this large part, assumption again, the majority of your consumer base is conservative and they're upset with you and they are calling you for this rollback because maybe some of them didn't even really know, and then suddenly it gets brought to their attention, which is a whole other concept and question and debate of being aware of what's going on in the corporations you're shopping at anyways, but still it's just interesting to look at that and how that all ended up playing out, right?
I would like to acknowledge, like, we recognize, especially all of the business professionals who are in here right now, we understand that there's a great fear associated with cancel culture. Like, I think a lot of companies do have this great, like, sense of, will one decision that I make change the way universally that we're viewed? Will it affect our stocks? Like, you are constantly underneath this magnifying glass, and social media magnifies the voices of the quiet people. So we understand and we recognize this is an issue. But one of the major things that we noticed as we were doing this research too as well is that when people adapted, once again, instead of conformed to whatever was going on, which really just means transparency with time. If you just immediately pivot on something that probably shouldn't be immediately pivoted on, you're probably not thinking about all of the ideas and you're going to be hurting other people. So if you have a timeline and you're transparent and you're adapting to whatever's going on, you are, and just off the get-go, will be recognizing issues and addressing them in healthy ways and leading by example, which answers the previous question as well. Your companies have the opportunity to be innovators of communication, really, by establishing a precedent that we can formulate good conversations amongst different consumer bases with each other, us as a company with other people. And so Tractor Supply Co.'s decision to do this opens this door to this realization of, like, if you need to make a change within your company, you should do it, but there are definitely steps and ways in which you should do that. And that's like the major debate or question that we're talking about here today, is how that should be done. And we just, once again, would like to really convey with this audience today that if you can adapt rather than conform through your timeliness and through your transparency, you will be able to own the decisions that you make. And then you don't have to do fear-based reactions. It's like, this is who we are. This is what identifies with us. We're not chasing after you as a consumer base. If you choose to walk away and go to a different company, that's totally fine. This is who we are. And that responsibility will empower you as a company, because we cannot keep having these fear-based decisions.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to take a few questions from the chat that are coming in. First, you looked at quarterly earnings and call transcripts and recordings. I think I remember you saying that. Were there any remarks from CEO, CFO, or questions by analysts and investors about DEI rollback that you saw?
We didn't have call transcripts. We weren't able to get that kind of stuff. But based on our research, we actually weren't able to find a lot of information about, like, shareholder meetings or anything like that.
Okay.
As far as we understand, they didn't meet or have anything within those 3 weeks before the rollback, and there hasn't been a lot that has been outspoken since the rollback. If there's something we missed in our research, of course, we'd love to know that. So if someone has that, like, please send our way. We'd really be interested, but we weren't really able to find anything to that extent.
Yeah, I think if you look, I mean, not that you have to go back and look, but usually you can get transcripts are usually live after a company's earnings calls. So you can usually go back and grab those and just see post this if there was anything that was picked up. Second question, and I believe you did this research. Did you take a look at the amount of social media traffic for criticism from Robbie Starbuck to see if it was how it gathered steam, and then Tractor Supply's company's low-key announcement that they did, and wondering, did that spread on its own, or was there push from the company at all? If that makes sense.
The company totally shut down their social media before the release happened. So, if you go back and you look at their Facebook and their X account, their Facebook took a long pause. Prior to the rollback, they had been posting 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5, 6, 7 times a week. So at least 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes several times a day, they were posting. Right as this whole debacle happened, they stopped and it wasn't used again until November. So they didn't release it themselves on social media. Um, as far as X goes, they posted it and then kind of, or no, wait, sorry, I think I have that wrong. Ada, you
Yeah.
have that. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, basically on X, they released it on X. Well, first, Robbie Starbuck, to the point of Robbie Starbuck's tweet and video. His video got millions of views, and then that was also put on X, and again, huge traffic because it's someone, this figure that already had a large following on X, but specifically calling out a major corporation CEO. And so it just got really picked up, and a lot of people were putting a lot of pressure on Tractor Supply Co., which then led to, yeah, how Lawton ended up blocking everybody, shutting down his account for a little while, as well as Tractor Supply Co. And in regards to their response, Tractor Supply Co. only released the the news release on X, just as Mariella was saying, not on any other
Their
account.
website.
Yeah, and on their website. But to the point of the website, it was not like the front center of their news release or anything. In fact, the title of the news release was like news release or something. Like it was not like roll back on DEI. Like,
It was like at the bottom of the page,
yeah, it was
really
on the bottom of
fine.
the page. And
Yeah.
also, interestingly, I found this fascinating. When we were looking at the tweets or like the other things that day on social media, the same day they released and published kind of pretty under the table a little bit, like their news release, they were really bolstering the fact that they had this veterans campaign at the same time for military veterans and how they're looking out for the veterans and how much that they care about their soldiers, which is great, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it was just a very interesting time to really push for that campaign and look at what we're doing for people at the same time that they're kind of also responding on X. Yeah, like here's our response, and then also got a huge amount of consumer response.
And when we looked at sentiment, the sentiment from the repost with a long paragraph comment, as he would have made on Starbucks, was mostly positive. Of course, probably because given his following and the people who would have been watching for it. But when we looked on Tractor Supply Co.'s X page on theirs, there was actually a lot of negative sentiment. We actually had wondered if that it was more negative than positive. We wondered if maybe that was because of the type of people that were following TSC on X, or we're not entirely sure why that is. But there was a lot more response on Robbie Starbucks page, and a lot more of it was positive. Hopefully that answered the question.
Absolutely. 2 minutes left. I'll let you flip a coin on who answers this one. Advice for teams who are currently researching now on how to build a kick-ass case like this one.
I think we could all just go really quick. I would just say that we separated. We didn't just always come to each other with our ideas. We spent a summer thinking and compiling a list of different ideas that we wanted to do. Then it was like an NFL draft like picking where we're presenting this information and these cases can compete against themselves. And we also had outsider people, like the president of the school happened to be in a couple of presentations that we're doing, and he vocalized what he thought was really interesting. So we brought out outside views to do that. But then more than anything else, we wanted to see what would have the largest impact and potential for like helping people after listening to our presentation. And we felt like this one was the most useful.
I'll make mine super fast. Mine would just be get enthusiastic and be happy. Like it was so fun to be in the library and like find on LinkedIn that the person who was the PR professional at TSC had either left or lost her job or whatever had happened during that whole thing. And 6 months later, her position was open at TSC. Like that whole thing, we were like, what just happened? We felt like I don't know, I felt like Mean Girls where we were like coming together and building our burning book and gossiping about TSC every day. Like it was so, we had so much fun. It was like, I was excited to see the Q4 reports. I wanted to know what was going to happen. I like had an expectation. So I think it's just like get enthusiastic. It can be so fun finding nuggets of information. You're like a detective figuring it out. Like if you do it like that, then like putting a report together can be grueling, but it won't be, and it'll be a lot of fun. So that would be my advice.
Ada, last word.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I couldn't sum it up better. Research, 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 and love the whole process. If you really care about the topic, even if it's tractors, of all things, we loved it. So as long as you're willing to do the sacrifice of doing the research of all the things and enjoy the process, then you'll find so much more, and it's an amazing experience. So
Awesome. Well, thank you again and great job on this case. Again, it was the best I've seen. So congratulations again and thanks for presenting.
Thanks.
thank you.
Awesome. Yes, that was fantastic, and appreciate all of you sharing and leading this discussion for our audience. This will be available tomorrow by end of day, and so we'll get that in your inbox, or you can check it out later online on our webinar webpage. So hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye.